Some people don't just love dogs. They exhale around them. Not everyone understands that. Some people see a dog and think, cute. But some people feel something else entirely. Their jaw loosens, their chest drops, the room gets quieter the second they hear paws on the floor or that soft collar sound moving toward them. They don't always know how to explain it. It's not that they hate people. It's that dogs often feel clearer than people do. No hidden meaning, no strange tone to decode, no pressure to be charming, impressive, or okay. Just presence, just a living being who looks at you like you still belong in the room. And for some people, that feeling goes deeper than comfort. They need a dog nearby to feel like the space is human enough to rest in. That isn't childish, and it isn't random. Psychology suggests it may reveal something profound about attachment, emotional overload, and the kind of connection a nervous system learns to trust. So, this is not really a video about dogs. It's a video about what your body may be trying to find through them. If that opening felt familiar, you already know this feeling. Because people who truly love dogs are rarely just talking about animals. What they're really describing is a kind of presence their nervous system trusts. They don't actually want a pet. They want something quieter than that. They want a living presence in the room that doesn't require a performance. Think about the moment you come home after a long day. Your shoulders are tight, your mind is still halfway inside conversations you wish you handled better, and the keys drop on the counter with that dull metallic sound. Maybe your coat slides off the chair, maybe you stand there for a second before moving, and then you hear it. The soft click of paws on the floor, a collar shifting, and suddenly the room changes. Your dog appears at the doorway, tail moving slowly, like it already knew you were coming long before the key hit the lock. You don't have to explain the day. You don't have to summarize how you feel. You don't have to look like you're holding it together. You just exist there for a moment, and something in your body quietly settles. For people who love dogs deeply, that moment is the point. Not ownership, not training, not the idea of having a pet. The presence. A living being who is simply there with you. No small talk, no subtle emotional tests, no pressure to be interesting. Just the quiet understanding that the two of you share the same room, the same air, the same ordinary moment. And strangely, for some people, that kind of connection feels more honest than most conversations they have all week. Because people who bond deeply with dogs often trust what is embodied more than what is promised. Words can be impressive, promises can be beautiful, charm can be persuasive, but presence is different. Presence is the dog that still walks to the door every single day, whether you had the best day of your life or one of the worst. Presence is the dog that rests its head against your shin while you stare at nothing for a few minutes longer than usual. Presence is the quiet, repetitive rhythm of routine. Walks, feeding time, the soft weight leaning against your leg while the evening settles in. There's no branding in that joy. No performance, no hidden calculation. And after enough years living inside a world full of clever words and complicated signals, some people start trusting consistency more than charm. In fact, for many dog lovers, this realization arrives almost silently. At some point, they stop being impressed by charisma. They start being impressed by steadiness. Because steadiness means something in the body can finally unclench. Some people are not impressed by charm anymore. They are impressed by consistency, and that shift says more about their psychology than they might realize. Another thing many dog lovers notice, even if they've never said it out loud, is how different it feels to be seen by a dog. Not analyzed, not measured, just seen. Human relationships, even the good ones, often come with invisible scorecards. Am I saying the right thing? Did that message sound too cold? Did I respond too late? Did they misunderstand me? Sometimes it feels like every interaction carries a quiet evaluation running in the background. And over time, that constant interpretation can make a nervous system tired. Not cynical, just tired. A dog doesn't erase that fatigue, but it does create a space where it briefly disappears. A dog isn't tracking your tone for hidden meaning. It isn't reviewing your emotional performance. It notices your presence, your voice, your scent, your energy in the room. And for a few minutes, the body experiences something rare in modern relationships. Interaction. without evaluation. That doesn't mean dogs replace people. It means they offer a different kind of relational environment, one where the nervous system doesn't have to scan constantly for judgment. And when someone experiences that kind of emotional clarity again and again, it begins to matter more than they expected. Which brings us to the deeper question this video is exploring. Why do dogs create that feeling so reliably for some people? Why does the bond sometimes feel stronger, calmer, and more honest than many human connections? And why do certain people seem almost wired to build their emotional world around that relationship? To understand that, we need to look at 4 layers of psychology. First, why dogs often feel fundamentally different from people in the way they relate to us. Second, why the complexity of modern life makes that kind of connection more valuable than ever. Third, what attachment, empathy, and the human caregiving system reveal about why this bond forms so deeply. And finally, why loving dogs intensely isn't childish, strange, or excessive at all. In many cases, it's a completely understandable response from a nervous system that has learned exactly what kind of connection it can trust. And once you see that, something else starts to come into focus. For many people, this bond does not feel powerful because dogs are magical. It feels powerful because modern life is exhausting in a very specific way. Not always loud, not always dramatic, just exhausting. Because a lot of human relationships now are not hard because they lack feeling. They are hard because they contain too much ambiguity, too many mixed signals, too many delayed replies that make you reread your last message, too many subtle shifts in tone, too many moments where you can feel something changed, but no one says what, too many hidden expectations dressed up as casual interaction. And after a while, the problem is not that people stop caring. The problem is that caring becomes tiring, not because love is bad, but because interpretation is expensive. You start to feel how much of adult life is spent decoding. What did that mean? Were they distant or just tired? Was that joke a joke? Do they want closeness or just access? Are you wanted or merely tolerated? A dog may still disappoint you. A dog may still be difficult, loud, destructive, needy, inconvenient, but a dog rarely makes you decode 12 layers of intention. That difference matters more than people think. Because for a nervous system already carrying too much noise, ambiguity itself becomes a stressor. And this is where dog lovers are often misunderstood. People assume they are choosing animals over humans because humans are messy, but that is too shallow. What many of them are actually choosing is clarity. Dogs are low-ambiguity bonds. Their signals are clearer, their needs are clearer, their joy is clearer, their fear is clearer, their attachment is clearer. When a dog is excited, you know. When a dog is uneasy, you know. When a dog trusts you, you feel it in the whole body of the animal. That does not make dogs simplistic. It makes them legible. And for someone who has spent years living inside social static, legibility feels like relief. There is something almost medicinal about not having to guess all the time, about not needing to ask, what are we really doing here? With a dog, the bond is still emotional. Sometimes deeply emotional, but it is embodied. You feel it in the leash pulled gently toward the door, in the waiting by the window, in the weight settling beside you on the couch after midnight, in the way a dog can look at you when your face has already dropped whatever expression you were performing for the rest of the world. For some people, that clarity lands in the body as safety, and that lands especially hard for a certain generation of adults. Gen X, Zennials, older millennials, not because they love more than everyone else, but because many of them were shaped by environments that did not teach emotional life in a clean or generous way. A lot of them grew up learning how to hold it together before they learned how to name what they felt. They learned not to make a scene, not to be too needy, not to burden people, not to ask for too much reassurance. Handle it yourself, walk it off, calm down, don't be dramatic. That kind of conditioning does something subtle over time. It teaches a person to need comfort without always knowing how to ask for it. And then adulthood arrived. Not with more ease, but with more complexity, more screens, more messages, more access, more comparison, more invisible rules, more pressure to seem emotionally literate, socially responsive, professionally composed, and somehow still effortless while doing all of it. Relationships became more immediate and, in some ways, more exhausting. You could now be ignored in real time, misread instantly, compared constantly, kept close enough to monitor, but not close enough to trust. So, when someone from that emotional climate feels deep relief around a dog, it is not hard to understand why. Of course it feels good. Of course it feels like rest. Of course, a bond built on routine, physical presence, and visible emotion would feel more nourishing than one built on half-finished conversations and digital guesswork. No wonder this feels so good to them. And in everyday American life, this shows up in practical ways more than poetic ones. A dog gets you out of the house. Even when you were planning to stay inside with the lights low, your thoughts spiraling, and your phone face down beside you. The leash is still there. The dog still needs to go out. So you put on your shoes, you grab your keys, you step into the cold night air, and sometimes that small act is enough to interrupt the momentum of your own mind. That is part of why so many pet owners describe animals as companionship, support, calming presence, even a true friend. And with dogs especially, people often feel the added benefit of movement and structure woven into daily life. The comfort is emotional, but it is also behavioral. It lives in routines, walks, feeding times, play, and the ordinary rhythm of being needed in visible ways. That matters, because when your inner world is scattered, structure can feel like mercy. Feed the dog, take the dog out, refill the water bowl, sit for a minute, throw the ball, do it again tomorrow. It sounds simple from the outside, but simple is not the same thing as small. Sometimes simple is the very thing keeping a person from emotionally unraveling. And that is the deeper turn in this whole conversation. People who truly love dogs are not always escaping life. They are often regulating inside it. That love is not just preference. It is rhythm. It is interruption. It is co-regulation. It is one of the few places in modern life where a person can stop performing interpretation and start participating in presence. The dog does not fix the job. It does not heal the divorce. It does not erase grief, loneliness, financial pressure, aging, regret, or emotional fatigue. But it changes the conditions inside which a person carries those things. It gives the day shape. It gives care a direction. It gives affection a body. It gives stress somewhere softer to land. And when that happens often enough, love for dogs stops being a cute personality trait. It becomes part of how a person stays intact. Which is why the psychology here goes much deeper than loyalty or kindness. Because once a bond starts helping the nervous system feel safer, steadier, and more human inside modern life, we are no longer just talking about preference. We are talking about attachment. And that is where this gets even more revealing. And this is where the bond stops looking merely emotional and starts looking deeply logical. Because if loving dogs feels unusually intense to you, the explanation may be more precise than you just have a soft heart. For some people, a dog is not only a pet in the ordinary sense, it becomes something the nervous system organizes around. You reach for that presence when you are overwhelmed. You calm down faster when it is near. You think about it when you need to feel steady. And when it is gone, the room does not just feel empty. It feels unanchored. In attachment language, that kind of bond can begin to function like an attachment figure. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough to matter. That is why missing your dog intensely, needing your dog nearby, or feeling your whole body drop when your dog comes to sit beside you is not as irrational as it may sound from the outside. This is not childish. It is attachment, doing what attachment does. And once you understand that, one term suddenly becomes incredibly revealing: secure base. The reason your system may rely on your dog so much is not only because the dog comforts you. It is because the dog may serve two roles at once. First, a place to return when you are distressed. Second, a place that makes it possible to go back out into the world. Think about the most ordinary version of this. You come home drained. Maybe you sit on the floor before you even turn on the lights. Maybe your back leans against the couch. Maybe your breathing is still too high in your chest. Then your dog walks over, circles once, and lowers itself beside you, warm fur, quiet weight, a body that does not ask for explanation before it offers closeness. That is one side of the bond, a refuge, a place where the system comes down from alert. But secure attachment is not only about retreat, it is also about return. Because the other side of that same bond is what happens the next morning. You still get up, you still answer the email, you still go to the appointment, you still make it through another difficult conversation, another workday, another ordinary disappointment. Why? Sometimes because somewhere in the background of your body, you know there is still a living being waiting for you at the end of the day. That is what a secure base really means, not a fantasy, not dependence. A relationship that makes reality more survivable. A place safe enough that it becomes easier to leave it and easier to come back. And if that kind of experience repeats often enough, it can start changing something deeper than mood. It can start changing expectation. Psychology sometimes describes this with a quieter idea called an internal model, the private script your mind carries about closeness, trust, and whether your presence will be received warmly or turned into a burden. Most people never sit down and think, what is my model of love? They just live inside it. But repeated experiences shape it, and this is where dogs can do something unexpectedly profound. If a relationship keeps meeting you with visible gladness, if it keeps waiting for you without resentment, if it keeps returning to you without making your worth feel negotiable, if your ordinary presence is not treated like too much, too inconvenient, too needy, too difficult to carry, then some part of the mind may begin, very slowly, to revise itself. Maybe I am worth coming back to. Maybe closeness is not always a setup. Maybe care can be simple without being fake. That revision does not happen all at once. It happens through repetition, through the sound of paws meeting you at the door, through the dog that still comes closer when you are quiet, through the body that settles near yours, not because you earned it that day, but because the bond is still there. The warmth of its fur is not just warmth. For the brain, it becomes evidence. Physical, repeated, embodied evidence that proximity does not always end in tension. That matters. Especially for people who have spent years reading human closeness as something unstable, conditional, or expensive. And that is another reason dog lovers often develop a very specific kind of emotional intelligence. Not the polished kind, not the kind that sounds impressive at dinner. A quieter kind, a more physical kind. Living closely with a dog teaches you to pay attention to signals that never arrive as language. The breath changes first, then the eyes. Then the body gets smaller, tighter, more watchful. A tail lowers, a jaw stiffens. A whole animal goes still in a way that tells you more than words ever could. And if you love that animal, you learn to notice. You learn the difference between excitement and stress, between fatigue and fear, between trust and tolerance, between a body that is relaxed and a body that is bracing. Over time, that can shape the way you read vulnerability in general. Not because dog lovers are automatically wiser than everyone else, but because sustained attention to a nonverbal being trains the mind to respect silent cues. The sadness behind the smile, the tension behind the joke, the flinch in someone's voice, the way a person says, "I'm fine," while their whole body says otherwise. Research suggests there is a real, though modest, link here. Strong attachment to pets is associated with greater empathy toward animals, and that animal empathy can partially relate to more prosocial attitudes toward people as well. Not in a grand, magical way. Not enough to say dog lovers are morally superior, but enough to suggest that when a person spends years caring about the unspoken experience of another creature, that attention does not always stay confined to the animal world. It can widen the heart's field of perception. Still, the deepest layer of this may be even simpler. For many people, loving a dog activates something ancient and human. Not just attachment, care. There is a reason that stroking a frightened dog, wrapping a blanket around a trembling body, kneeling beside an animal that has been abandoned, or whispering to a dog that has just been startled can feel so intensely meaningful. That is not merely affection. That is the caregiving behavioral system coming online. This is the system that moves us to soothe, protect, nurture, and respond when another living being is distressed. You see fear and you move closer. You see vulnerability and your voice softens. You see pain and your hands become careful. You see a creature shaking, waiting, hurt, misunderstood, and something in you rises to meet it. That response is deeply human. So, when someone loves dogs fiercely, especially rescue dogs, anxious dogs, old dogs, dogs other people overlooked or gave up on, what is being expressed may be much larger than preference. Sometimes it is the caregiving system, recognizing a place where love can finally become action. A place where tenderness is not wasted, where protection is needed, where steadiness matters, where care does not have to compete with ego, status, or emotional games. For some people, loving a dog is what happens when care finally finds somewhere honest to land. But there is a harder truth here too, and this is the part that makes the whole picture more adult. Not every deep bond with a dog comes from peace. Not every intense attachment is secure just because it feels loving. Sometimes a person loves a dog from a place of steadiness, trust, and healthy reciprocity. And sometimes the bond becomes so powerful because it feels safer than human closeness ever has. That difference matters, because a deep attachment can be soothing and still carry anxiety inside it. A person can adore their dog and also panic at separation. They can feel bonded and still feel emotionally fragile when distance enters the picture. They can lean on the relationship not only because it is beautiful, but because it costs less than human rejection. Research has begun to show this nuance clearly. Frequent, pleasant interactions with pets are associated with stronger and more secure bonds. But attachment anxiety around pets, the fear, preoccupation, or distress tied to separation and uncertainty, appears more strongly linked with depressive symptoms than simple bond strength alone. That does not make the love fake. It makes it revealing. Sometimes the dog is not just loved. Sometimes the dog is where the nervous system goes when human closeness feels too expensive. And that is not a condemnation. It is a clue. A clue that this bond may be doing more than bringing joy. It may be helping a person survive emotional conditions they do not fully have words for yet, which means the real question is no longer whether loving dogs deeply is excessive. The real question is what grief, what fatigue, what longing, and what hope this bond has been carrying all along. And this is usually the part people miss when they look at someone who deeply loves dogs. From the outside, it can look excessive, too attached, too emotional, a little strange, maybe even childish. Some people see the photos, the routines, the way a person talks to their dog, the way they rearrange their schedule around walks, food, medicine, comfort, weather, aging, fear, and they think the bond is too much. What they do not see is how many of those same people are already exhausted by human ambiguity, exhausted by having to read between lines, exhausted by being misread themselves. Exhausted by closeness that never arrives cleanly, only with conditions, timing, subtext, status, and invisible performance reviews. So when they love a dog with unusual depth, it is not always because they care less about people. Sometimes it is because they are tired of how costly people can feel. Not evil, not hopeless, just costly. Costly to decode, costly to trust, costly to recover from. And in that context, a dog can begin to feel less like a preference and more like relief. That is the hidden grief underneath so much of this love. Not just love for dogs, relief around dogs. Because beside a dog, many people do not have to hide the exact kind of tired they carry. They do not have to keep their face arranged correctly. They do not have to win the conversation. They do not have to sound fine before they are allowed to be close. They do not have to wonder whether today is one of the days they are still easy to love. They can sit on the floor in a quiet house with one lamp on. They can feel the weight of a warm body settling against their calf. They can hear claws tap once against the floor, then silence. And for a few minutes, nothing in the room is asking them to explain who they are. That matters more than most people understand, because there are forms of loneliness that do not come from being physically alone. They come from being too interpreted, too managed, too measured, too often required to translate yourself before anyone offers gentleness. A dog does not remove every ache in a life, But for some people, it removes one very specific ache, the ache of having to earn softness. And that is why this deserves a more honest reframing. The behavior is easy to see. They need dogs. They prioritize dogs. They build routines, emotional habits, and even pieces of their identity around dogs. The shame label is easy too. Too attached, too sensitive, weird, avoidant, closer to animals than people. But the biological truth is often more compassionate than that. The attachment system recognizes safety there. Not perfect safety, not magical safety, but a form of safety built from clarity, consistency, and low-ambiguity presence. And the caregiving system recognizes something too. It recognizes a living place where tenderness can go without being mocked, manipulated, or wasted. So what looks from the outside like too much may actually be a nervous system making an efficient choice. It is choosing a bond that costs less defensive energy. It is choosing a relationship where care stays embodied. It is choosing a form of closeness that helps the body regulate enough to keep living the rest of life. That is not weakness. That is survival with a heartbeat, a leash by the door, a water bowl under warm kitchen light. So you are allowed to call that feeling real. You are allowed to admit that a dog may have given you something many human beings never did. Steadiness, visible gladness, a reason to come home with your guard a little lower. You are allowed to feel your body soften in the presence of loyalty and not be ashamed of that softness. You are allowed to love the creature that met you at the door on nights when you were no longer sure what in your life still felt uncomplicated and true. And you are also allowed to ask a harder question, gently. Is this bond healing something in you? Or is it protecting you from having to look directly at a deeper loneliness you have carried for years? For many people, the answer is both. And there is no need to rush that answer. Sometimes understanding begins exactly here in the quiet honesty of finally naming what the bond has been doing for you all along. If some part of this felt uncomfortably accurate, that may be because you were never too much for loving a dog this deeply. You may have just been recognizing safety with more honesty than most people do. And if this gave language to something you have felt for a long time, let that matter. Stay with that. If you want to help this kind of quiet, honest work reach more people who need it, a small gesture matters more than you think. A like, a comment, sharing this with another dog person, or subscribing to Psyche Shelter, if this space feels like somewhere your mind can breathe. Because there are more people carrying this exact tenderness than they realize. And maybe they need the words too. The people who truly love dogs are not always escaping humanity. Sometimes they are guarding the part of themselves that still believes love should feel safe in the body.